Hi everybody and welcome. In today's video, I want to give you an overview about how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing music. Let's get started by defining what I mean by AI music. So this is a very large field that spans a lot of different tasks and use cases, but I tend to divide it into two different subfields. The first of which is music information retrieval, or its acronym MIR. So what's MIR? Well, in a nutshell, with MIR, we extract information directly from music. So here you have a visualization of a typical pipeline in MIR. So you have an audio file or some music, you feed it into an algorithm, potentially a neural network, and then on the outside you get some information about the content of the music. For example, you can extract the musical genre starting from an audio file, its mood, its instruments or chord progressions. Now, MIR is extensively used by music streaming services like Spotify. So whenever you listen to Spotify and you get recommended a track, well, behind it you have MIR algorithms that are working. So in the case of Spotify, as I mentioned, MIR is used for recommendation, but also for search or just continuation. So when you're listening to some music to Spotify and then you get another track, well, that is another MIR algorithm in action. Now, the second part of AI music, the second subfield, is generative music. I'm aware that this is a kind of simplification of what AI music is, but it's nice to give you an overview of this two contrasting, almost opposite parts. So what's generative music about? Well, in a sense, generative music can be thought as the opposite of MIR. So you have an algorithm, potentially once again a neural network, and you use it to generate, to create some music, which could be created directly in an audio format or a symbolic format like MIDI or a score, and then this score can be produced or sonified using VST instruments or other tools like sample libraries. Now, so to give you just a kind of high-level overview of this two subfields, we can think of MIR as analysis, so extracting and analyzing music, whereas generative music is the creative part, or using machines and AI to generate music. Now, in this video, I want to focus on the impact of generative music on music and the music industry, not MIR. Okay, so now that I've defined this high-level overview of AI music and I specified what I'm going to talk about, let's just get started here. So we want to answer this question. So how's generative music currently transforming music? To answer this question, we may want to take a look at another question that's very, very connected to the first one. So who's generative music impacting? And we can think of generative music as impacting the whole music pipeline. And what do I mean by the whole music pipeline, or all the different actors involved in music? Well, generative music is definitely having an impact on listeners. It also has an impact on musicians, the way musicians create music, and it has an impact on media and definitely media creators. So now let me just zoom into each of these actors and give you a few examples of how generative music is actually impacting on each of these actors. Okay, let's get started with generative music and listeners. So in this case, we have systems that can enhance the listening experience. So for this use case, we have an AI system that generates music, and this music is supposed to be consumed by the listener. So this is something akin to what we're used to. So we have a radio station and you just listen to the music, or you are listening to some music on Spotify. So the music generated by these AI systems is just supposed to be consumed by the listener. Now, you may be thinking that this is something super cutting edge and very innovative, but in reality, we have these type of systems since the late 50s, where we had the first example that I know of some AI generated music. And so this piece was called the Iliac Suite. It was a string quartet, and it was generated using a bunch of different AI techniques, like, for example, generative grammars and Markov chains. Okay. Now, let me give you a few examples of systems that actually can generate music. So here, I'm going to introduce Andal. So Andal is a Berlin-based AI music startup company. And the Andal's promise is that of creating personalized soundscapes, so sound environments that can help you focus, relax, sleep, study. The interesting thing about Andal is that it actually closed the deal with Warner, a record deal. So this was like quite unheard of, because it was the first time that we had an AI algorithm actually closing a record deal with a major label. So the music generated by Andal is not really absolute music. It's more like soundscapes or like sound environments that are like functional, in the sense that they can be used like to sleep, to focus. So it's not really like fully fledged music, or what we would appreciate as fully fledged music. On the other hand, we have some examples of like fully fledged music that is powered by AI. So here we have Bloom 10 Worlds. This is an interactive album, if you will, and was created by Brian Eno and Peter Chilvers. Now, Brian Eno is a super famous musician, obviously, but he's always been at the forefront of generative music. And actually, he was the one who actually created the term generative music. But what's Bloom 10 Worlds? Well, this is a mobile app. It's an application that you can consume on Apple devices. And the basic idea here is that you have a generative music engine, and the music is generated kind of on the fly, but it reflects some initial musical ideas provided by the composers. Now, the curious aspect here is that the listener can explore ever-changing musical worlds. And if you explore twice the same musical world, then you're going to have slightly different takes of the same musical world. So the app is kind of like interactive, it's non-linear, and it's an ever-changing, infinite musical experience that's powered through this generative music engine. So the third example that I want to bring regarding this initial use case of listeners impacted by generative music is the pace. So here we have a pop star, Dua Lipa, joining up with Jaguar. And so they created together a song called The Pace. Now, the kind of like the interesting fact here is that we have an intelligent algorithm that recombines different parts of this song, The Pace, dynamically. So you can think of like this song is divided into a number of like different tracks. So for example, the drum track, the synthesizer track, the voice track. Now there are a bunch of takes of the very same track. So different takes of the voice, different takes of the drum parts, or different takes of the guitar parts. Now the aspect that's the kind of like peculiar aspect of like this project is that these different parts get recombined or remixed together on the fly, and the remix depends on the user's profile. And basically, like what you could do like on this website was just connecting your Spotify. Your Spotify gets analyzed, and then based on that analysis, a kind of music profile gets created, and that music profile is used to decide how to recombine the pace so that it can kind of like it can be tailored to your musical taste and musical profile. So this example is not necessarily generative music per se, but it's kind of at a higher level, it's intelligent recombination. And the end result is that you're gonna have the same piece of music, but implemented in a bunch of different ways depending on who you are and your personal musical taste. Okay, so now let me give you a little bit of an idea what may actually happen in the future for this use case. So how AI is going to impact, or generative music is going to impact the listening experience. Of course, I don't have the crystal ball, so what I'm saying could be like totally wrong, but based on my experience, this is like what may actually happen. I think in the future, we're going to see generative music that's going to help with personalized functional music. So we're going to have music that's tailored to you as a person with your own musical taste, and also this music is going to be kind of influenced by your mood, whether you're sad or happy, for example, by the weather, and a bunch of other external variables that are going to actually impact the generation of the music itself. When I talk about functional music here, I refer to music that has a goal. For example, music for studying, or music for exercising, or music for relaxing, right? Now, this is the first aspect. The second aspect that I think is going to happen is that we're going to see the rise of interactive albums and interactive songs. So far, we experience music in a kind of linear way. So you just listen to the music on Spotify, on the radio, or wherever. But it's the very same piece of music that you can always listen to from beginning to end, and it's always the same experience. But I think with the help of generative music, we can go the extra step. So creating interactive albums and songs where the listener becomes a user who can interact with the song itself and influence the way the song develops. So this is going to create a closer relationship between the artist and the listener or interactor. Okay, so now let's move on to the second use case. And as I was mentioning earlier, this second kind of revolutionary aspect of generative music is going to impact musicians. So here we're talking about AI-powered tools for musicians, or intelligent software that's going to help musicians one way or another do his or her job. So here we are in the realm of human-machine interaction, if you will, because you have a human composer, a human musician, and a machine or intelligent AI music system, and the two should kind of collaborate together. And here we have a bunch of different use cases. So these tools can be used for inspiration, so getting inspired by AI music composers, for example. This could be also enhancement tools, or this can facilitate the way like we create music. This can also be tools for collaboration, or for just practicing music and being educated about music. So let me give you a few examples here as well. So I want to start with this amazing piece of research. So this is Shimon. So Shimon is a robo, and he improvises jazz on a marimba. And the cool thing is that he improvises jazz in real time, playing with other musicians. So here you can see Shimon in all of its glory. So as you can see, Shimon can listen to the music, understand what's going on, and then improvise and so produce music that goes along with all the other accompaniment around it. Here's another example of AI music tools that help musicians with their job. So this is Magenta Studio. This is a suite of different AI music applications developed by Google. So here you have like 5 of these applications: Continue, Group, Generate Full Bars, Drumify, and Interpolate. So these applications or plugins can be used directly in a digital audio workstation called Ableton, so that there's full integration between the musician's workflow and these AI music tools. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of all of these 5, but I want just let you mention a couple of these because I think they are really interesting. So Continue. So what does Continue do? Well, you can load a melody, for example, or a drum bit, and then Continue is going to continue the melody or drum bit that you've created. So this is a way of like getting inspiration, starting like from a seed that you provide to the AI music tool. Now, Drumify is also another very interesting plugin. In this case, you can have, for example, a chord sequence, or you can have a bass line or a melody. And then what Drumify will do is create a drum bit that can accompany your chord sequence or drum bass. So this is like a really interesting aspect because it's going to kind of like complete your musical ideas by adding a drum layer, so with percussions and a groove there. So another example of AI music application that I think is super cool is called NSynth. Once again, this was developed by Google Magenta. So this is a synthesizer, but it's not a simple normal synthesizer, but it's actually a neural synthesizer. So in other words, there's a neural network that generates sounds, new sounds, and sounds that can interpolate different instruments. So you can have a sound that's in between, for example, a flute and a saxophone. So here's NSynth in action. So as you can see, you have like 4 sounds. So clean bass, electronic pianos, sitar, grunge bass. And so moving from one point to another, we're just interpolating the sound. What's going to be the future of intelligent tools which help musicians? I think we have a bunch of different situations here. So first of all, I believe that musicians will focus on high-level musical ideas, and then the actual implementation details and the boring stuff, like for example mastering, mixing, can actually be offloaded to these AI music tools. Then another interesting use case here is that of having AI music buddies where you can practice and perform with. And this is the example of Schumann. Now, imagine if instead of having Schumann, you had an AI version of Jimi Hendrix or Bach, and you could actually play with Bach or Jimi Hendrix or their virtual counterparts. So this would be like super, super interesting. And a final aspect that I see here very, very possible is that composers will collaborate with AI tools to be more productive and to get inspiration. So I already know a few composer friends who use AI music tools to kind of like get inspirations or get initial ideas for simple music, like music for ads or music for videos. And this is going to kind of like streamline the production process and make composers more productive. Now, let's move on to the third and final actor here in this AI music revolution. So this is the case where generative music is impacting media creators or media more in general. In this case, we are talking about AI tools which generate music for media, and these AI tools can be used by media creators to actually generate music for their content. And in this specific case, we are talking about 2 types of content. So one is linear content or linear media, and the other one is interactive media. For linear media, I'm referring to videos, movies, and ads, whereas for interactive media, I'm talking about video games, virtual reality, augmented reality applications, apps more in general, or websites. Now, Here we have a few startups that have been active in this space, providing like these AI music tools that generate music for media. Here we just want to mention a couple of these. So one is Amper Music. So what Amper Music allows you to do is to upload your video and then generate some music that goes well for your video. So what you can do is choose a mood and a style or a musical genre for the music. You can also choose the instrumentation, set a BPM, and then just like tweak the music so that it actually gets along very well with the video. Now, another startup that was active in this space was my startup, Melodrive. So at Melodrive, we built an AI music engine that generates music for video games. So the interesting take here is that this music is for an interactive media, for a non-linear media like a video game. So what was happening with our system was that the generation of the music of this soundtrack was happening in real time, and the music was adapting to the emotional state of the video game. So for example, if your character was fighting against a dragon, then the music would become more tense. You would have, I don't know, like percussions and very tense sounds. And then if you were actually losing that battle and, for example, you died, then the music would all of a sudden become very sad. But on the other hand, if you are just like chilling out with your character on a beach, then the music would also be relaxed and, yeah, very chill. What's the future gonna hold for the use case of AI music and media? I think first of all, AI will likely take over production of music for YouTube videos, for example, and ads. This is music that's not super complicated and it shouldn't be super high level. So it's very functional. So this is something that AI will probably do fairly well. Then the second point is what excites me the most. AI will be able to enhance composers when it's time for them to score interactive media like video games. And so here we have a problem, because for video games, for example, you want a lot of content, a lot of musical content, and this musical content should adapt depending on what's going on in the game. But the problem is that human composers are limited. They can only create 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours of music, not more than that. But what if you had an AI that could actually get almost like read the composer's mind and implement some composer's high level ideas, so that like those initial musical phrases or like musical moods would get implemented by the AI. And this is like probably what we're going to see down the line. And this is like, as I said, what excites me the most, this idea of extending the capacities of composers to stuff that they can't do today. And finally, I believe that we'll be witnessing in a few years AI generated music for social media. For example, on TikTok, right? They're having snippets of music that you can add to your TikTok, deciding, for example, simple variables like the style of the music and the mood of the music. Right. Now, before I finish this video, I want to have a few final reflections. So first of all, I want to say that generative music is by no means like accepted or adopted in the current musical world today. And there are a few reasons because this is happening. So there are a few blockers. First of all, music quality. So the music that gets generated by all of these systems that we discussed today is by no means at the same level as the music that human composers can create. So there's still a huge gap between the two. Then another problem is that there's a lot of suspicion from markets, but also people. So when it comes time to talk about AI music or AI generated music, there's still a lot of bias, because it seems like that creativity is something that only humans have. And so having a machine creating music is something weird, and people tend to reject that a little bit. And then there's also another aspect, that many of these industries that will be impacted by generative music have a huge inertia to change. in my case, I can tell you, like when I was dealing with like video game music, and so like talking to video game companies, they had a very hard time accepting that an AI could generate music for video games, and that in part was also because these game companies have been creating music in the same ways for 20, 30 years, and changing that workflow was quite difficult to achieve. Okay, so now let me focus on the promises of generative music. So the high level highlights that I believe like we'll see in a few years. First of all, we'll see some form of music democratization. So in a sense, everyone will be able to be a musician. So what this means is that generative music is going to lower the entry barrier for being creative with music. Does this mean that everyone will actually be a musician? Of course not. It's very similar to what happened with Instagram. Now, Instagram enabled people to be photographers, but of course we have top-notch photographers, and top-notch photographers are just way ahead of all the other Instagrammers who put like their photos on Instagram, right? And the same thing will also happen with AI music. So you'll have like kids or people or amateur musicians who will play around and will be helped by AI music tools to create interesting music. But of course, it's never going to be at the same level of professional musicians. And then the second promise, I think, again, is the most interesting for me. And that is the capacity of AI music to extend what's possible for musicians and composers. And here again, I think a super interesting use case for this will be that of scoring interactive media, non-linear media that requires almost like infinite amount of music that adapts second by second to whatever is happening in a video game or a non-linear piece of media. So to finish off, generative music should extend what's musically possible today. So we need AI to help us complement who we are and extending our human capacities as musicians and composers. But it shouldn't replace what humans can do already. We already have a ton of musicians who create very interesting music, and we don't want to replace that. So we shouldn't go in that direction. Rather, we should go in the direction of extending what's musically possible today. Okay. So this was like everything like for today. I hope like you learned quite a lot about this generative music revolution and how it's going to impact different actors in the music space. So listeners, musicians, and media or media creators. Now, if you want to learn more or you need like any type of consulting in the generative music space, well, I'm here for that. So you should definitely go to my website, so valeriavellardo.com, and there you can request a clarity call with me in case like you want to learn more about how to use all of these techniques for your startup or your company. Perfect. That's all for today. I hope I'll see you next time. Cheers.